we are set to go live, and we are now live.
Well, good evening, and welcome. Welcome those who are participating in our meeting this evening. This is the Exeter Township School District's board meeting. And I want to welcome folks who are joining us via YouTube live streaming, as well as the folks who are with us on our Zoom call, our administrators and our school board members. This evening we have two meetings that we're going to go through. The first meeting is a board voting meeting. It's a short meeting, special meeting, to deal with some very specific matters that are that require us to take immediate action. And followed by that, we'll have a workshop meeting where we'll be discussing, as we typically do, the agenda for our next board meeting, which will be on August 18th. Before we start this evening's meeting, I do want to make a few announcements. First, that our board has had executive session meetings on July 28th to deal with personnel matters. We also had an executive session earlier this evening to deal with personal matters as well. Also, a matter of, I think, importance for the community. We learned late last week of the passing of Jeff Keller. Jeff Keller was a former principal at Exeter High School. He served the district from 1987 to 2005, 18 years as high school principal, well respected, well liked, and we send our condolences to his wife Karen and his three sons and family. So if you would please, if we could take a moment of silence in memory of Jeff Keller. Thank you. So we'll start. This is our formal board meeting. And I'm going to ask Mrs. Guidish for a roll call to establish attendance at the meeting this evening.
Hunter Ahrens. John Fiddler.
Here.
Ann Herring.
Here.
David Hemberger.
Here.
Michael Japina.
Here.
Sharon McClendon.
Here.
Hurry Miller.
Here.
Michelle Stratton.
Here.
Allison Wilson.
Here.
8 board members are present.
Thanks, Mrs. Guidish. This evening, we're going to start off our board meeting with a report from our superintendent, Dr. Kim Miner. Dr. Miner.
Thank you, Dr. Hemberger. As the community and the board are aware, this Friday, I put out an announcement that I would be recommending that the school year start the first 9 weeks in full virtual learning mode. Previous to this meeting tonight, we had a curriculum committee meeting where our entire virtual plan was laid out for the community that can be accessed on our district website, and the presentation itself can be viewed on YouTube as a recording for anybody who would like to review our virtual plan. This evening, we have several important items. One is the approval of our new business administrator for the district. As you know, Ms. Guidish has submitted her retirement. We're very sad to see her go, but we feel very confident in our candidate as the new business administrator, and that we'll have a seamless transition and excellent business management will continue at the district. In terms of the actions that the board will be taking at this special voting meeting, in addition to a facilities project, the vote on the new business administrator, the specific vote that the board will be asked to take relative to the virtual start school is on the submission to the Department of Education of a new timetable. At the previous board meeting that we had in July, a health and safety plan was submitted for a full opening with a virtual option to be utilized during the green phase of COVID-19 in the county. And during that period of time, although the state doesn't appear to continue to update the phases, the county has moved out of the numbers that would have been considered green phase numbers. And so I've moved forward with that recommendation. At the July meeting, the board also approved an emergency resolution that would grant me authority as the superintendent to change the schedule based on safety. And so tonight, we are simply asking the board to approve an alternate time schedule for the submission to PDE. The board had already approved the previous emergency resolution, granting me the authority to declare an emergency and move to full virtual if deemed necessary. Finally, after the board votes on that, if the board does move ahead with the PDE time change to full virtual, we'll need to change the school calendar. And so there'll be an additional vote on the school calendar change, which would push the first day of school for students from August the 24th, that Monday, to the Thursday of that week, with 2 half days on the Thursday and Friday to allow for professional development for a total of 4 days during that week, 3 full days and 2 half days for teachers, so that they can become fully prepared with our new resources that we have purchased, including Zoom and many technology resources, as well as become acquainted with our new schedule in a deep manner and review best practices and collaboration for planning in a virtual environment. When that calendar change basically puts 3 Act 80 days at the beginning of the calendar and removes them from later times during the year. So we will maintain the 180-day requirement that PDE has, well, actually the state legislature has mandated for schools in Pennsylvania. So I want to take one moment and offer my sincere thanks to the administrative team of the district who have worked tirelessly over the past week or so to fully develop our virtual plan. I'd like to thank all of the support staff that have worked with us on the plan, as well as all of the teachers who have attended meetings over these past weeks to become familiar with the plan. Everybody's dedication to Exeter and the well-being of our students has been absolutely phenomenal, and I couldn't be prouder to be the superintendent of this school district. I'd also like to thank the board for their ongoing support and our community. Our community has reached out to me and to the board through email, through participation in my coffee and conversations. I've had numerous phone conversations and various communications with community members. And I'd like to thank the community for their passion and support of Exeter, for their willingness to share their thoughts and feedback. I know that this is a difficult time for everyone. There aren't necessarily good options here. They're just picking the best of difficult options, given the fact that we're pursuing education in the midst of a pandemic. So again, my sincere thanks to the respectful dialogue that has gone on in the community, and to everyone who works for and with the Exeter School District for keeping the best interests of our students, our staff, and our community in mind. Thank you, Dr. Hamburger.
Thanks, Dr. Miner. So in advance of all of our voting, we always have an opportunity for public comment. And we know that some folks have already started to communicate with board members via email and phone calls, as Dr. Miner had mentioned. This is also an opportunity at this moment for folks in the community to reach out to the board and make a comment if they'd like regarding any item on the agenda or any other significant topic that might be of concern to the board. Obviously, the virtual learning issue has, I think, dominated the communications we've received so far, and we anticipate conversation about that and comments from that on that this evening. So we're going to take a period of time, and we're going to review public comments. For those of you who have already submitted those, we'll review those first. Right now, anyone else who would like to submit is welcome to submit. I'm going to ask Mr. Joe Way to kind of outline the process that we use for allowing for public comment. Mr. Way.
Thank you, Dr. Hamburger. This evening, we will be listening on the questions at myexeter.org address. So it's questions at myexeter.org. If you send them in, we will add them. Please be sure to include your name and address so we can include that in the comments.
Thanks, Mr. Way. Yeah, it is important. We must have your name and address. And we'll be limiting, like in our regular board meetings, we limit our questions to approximately 3 minutes or comments to 3 minutes. And we're going to try to keep this at a maximum of 1 hour. If it goes beyond that, we will accept the comments. We'll enter those into our minutes, and that will become part of the public record. So with that, Joe, let's start with the first question that you have, or comment.
The first question comes from Frank Quigley of 35 Pickwick Place. Board members, thank you for your time and consideration. I'm opposed to the plan to proceed with the virtual only option for the school district. I know a lot of time and consideration was placed into this decision, and that these are uncertain times as it pertains to SARS-CoV virus. My question specifically focuses on those children with special needs. My son is on the autism spectrum and had a great difficulty as a learner from March to June. What avenues have been explored to help these students in particular? My wife and I have a lot of concerns and are exploring other options. Thank you, Frank Quigley.
Dr. Minor or one of your staff?
I'd like to ask Mrs. Harris to respond to that question as our Director of Pupil Services.
Thank you, Dr. Minor. We've learned a lot of lessons in the special education community from the mandated closure in the spring. I think the entire educational community as a whole has learned a lot of lessons from that experience. And one of the things we acknowledge is that our students with special needs did struggle during that time. And so that's been at the forefront of our planning, all the way from building a master schedule at each of the buildings, all the way down to what individualized lessons will look like for students moving forward. Also looking at all of those other pieces that go into play for students with special needs, like our speech sessions, our OT sessions, our behavioral supports that we can provide online, and really being given the gift of time to be able to plan for those things, as opposed to in the spring where every district was in the same situation where we had students we needed to instruct and basically needed to figure it out as we were going along. So we've been collaborating and working on different platforms and online technologies that we'll be able to use with students with special needs. That planning continues. One of the gifts that we have from building principals, as we talked about in curriculum committee, is the fact that we now have very consistent schedules in the buildings, and that allows us to more easily provide those special ed services at more structured times.
And Don, will Mr. Quigley's family have access to those folks involved in their son's care as they need?
Absolutely.
Mr. Way, next question or comment?
The next question comes from Jason Mell, 401 Pathfinder Drive. I commend Superintendent Minor for making a tough decision to take Exeter virtual for the first 9 weeks of school. It's not practical, in my opinion, for educators to ensure proper health protocols are met while also trying to provide a quality education for our children. For the schools that are doing a full or hybrid reopening this fall, I believe there's a very real possibility that some will have to shut down and move to a virtual mid-quarter due to positive infections. While it's understandable that some parents are upset with Dr. Minor's recommendation, I would fathom that many would prefer to make arguments weeks ahead of time instead of having to adjust to an immediate shutdown. Granted, many individuals who contract COVID-19 recover. However, there are some who do not. I would rather err on the side of caution until we can be fully confident in reopening schools safely for students, teachers, and staff.
Thank you. Mr. Way?
Question
Next
4
comment.
comes from Deanne Snelling, 380 Northview Road. She has a couple of questions. The first one, will the marching band be permitted to attend football games, home or away? If no, will band camp continue? Most community service opportunities were canceled because of COVID. Will the requirement for seniors be adjusted as a result? Will the SAT and ACT be offered at Exeter this fall?
So in terms of band as well as athletics, we approved summer plans. Those plans are still being utilized, and it's our intention to maintain them. Right now, the Berks County Division of the PIAA as a whole, as well as the county superintendents, are in discussions about how to proceed with the fall athletic season. And then that will obviously play into what happens with bands as well. So we anticipate at the August 18th board meeting to have an update on where we stand with fall athletics. As far as the community service requirements, our building principals, along with our teaching learning team, will work flexibly with parents around meeting those requirements given the complications of COVID-19. And as far as the ACT and the SAT, we'll collaborate with both of those organizations that issue those exams in terms of what the requirements are to have COVID-19 safe administration. So we have not had direct communication with them that I'm aware of at this point. Dr. Winters, are you aware of any reach out from the ACT or the SAT at this point?
No, not at this time.
Thank you.
The next question comes from Allison Merritt, 10 Nancy Circle. Based on the review and approval of Code 201, Volume 3, 2019, admission of students during the last school board meeting, kindergarten students can still be evaluated for early admission, e.g. waiving the early birth date requirement for an 11-day difference. Early admission evaluation was not removed, as I was told was going to be for the 2021 school year and all future school years by school district employee. When are the early admission evaluations for kindergarten for the 2021 school year taking place? Who do I contact to schedule the early admission evaluation? Watching the curriculum committee meeting presentation, I do not have concerns with my early learners succeeding in kindergarten, even with the learning being virtual. Many thanks, Allison Merritt, 10 Nancy Circle.
I'm going to ask Dr. Winters to address that question, please.
So, in terms of early admission, you would want to reach out directly to Melissa Devlin, who is the supervisor of literacy and ESL, works with our assessing and works with our kindergarten students in terms of figuring out, what is needed to admit them early, in conjunction with Mrs. Harris and the Pupil Services Department. The policy that you're referring to in terms of students that may need early admission, we would look at that on a case-by-case basis and figure out a way to assess the child in a manner that meets the guidelines related to social distancing and safety.
Dr. Hemberger, that ends all the questions. There are several that do not have full information, and we had a discussion earlier not to proceed with those questions.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, unless we have, a name and an address, we're not prepared to accept a question or a comment. So I think then with that, I think we can move on into the agenda. And let's move to Facilities Committee, and that's Mr. Fiddler. Mr. Fiddler, do you want to review the item under Facilities Committee?
I didn't have power today, so I did not have a chance to review. Just give me a second. Oh, and is this the item we talked about?
This is actually the project that recently came about with the breaching at the senior high school, and that we had to get this work done before the heating season.
Right, okay. Is Rob on the call?
He is.
Rob, I wonder if you could take a few minutes and go over this so we have a full understanding about what we're about to vote on.
Mrs. Guidish, can you just review the project, please?
Sure. At the senior high school, with the ductwork, the boiler, et cetera, some of the materials that had been used in the last renovation, which goes back to 2003, were not the appropriate materials, and there's disintegration, and there was an issue of CO2 leaking. So we had SDI, Systems Design Engineering, prepare the specifications, put it out on the street. And these are the bids that we opened today to make that replacement. And the lowest bid is $69,165 from the Worko Group.
Thank you, Ann.
Mr. Fiddler, do you want to make the motion?
Sure, I can't read the whole thing because the images are blocking it. It is recommended that the Board of School Directors awards the bid Exeter Township Senior High School, something I can't see.
Boiler breaching replacement project to the Worko Group, the lowest responsible bidder at a cost of $69,165.
There we go. Thank you, Ann. So that's the motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries 8-0. Thanks, Mr. Fiddler. We're going to move on to item 5 in our voting meeting agenda, and that's Personnel Committee. Mrs. Wilson.
It's recommended that the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following appointments. Brian D. Fick, Business Administrator with an effective date to be determined contingent upon terms and conditions specified in a properly executed mutual agreement.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Welcome, Brian. And I understand that Brian's approximate date to start is somewhere early October. So we're looking forward to Brian starting. We're certainly not eager to see Ann Guidish leave. She's been a fantastic business manager. I'm sure we'll have many more opportunities to speak about Ann and her service to the district, but we do want to welcome Brian as our new business manager. Let's move on to student functions, item 6 in the agenda, and that's Mrs. Stratton.
I'm going to read each one of these separately. Item A, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve the emergency instructional time schedule for submission to the Pennsylvania Department of Education as required by section 520.1 of the Pennsylvania School Code.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Can I say something, Dave?
Sure thing. Yeah.
Okay. For the past week, I've received several emails about this topic, and half of them have been in favor of 100% virtual and half are against it. It's very important to me to support our superintendent because I truly believe her best intentions are for the kids in this district. But I have a hard time reconciling the fact that only offering virtual learning will not allow us to meet the needs of half of our community, whereas offering a form of face-to-face with virtual will meet the needs of the whole. I don't feel that the plan that we have now for face-to-face with virtual will work, but if we reevaluate the plan to consider maybe a hybrid schedule, we could solve classroom size issues and transportation issues. Thank you for letting me share that.
Thanks, Dr. Herring. Are any other comments before we vote on this item? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
No.
Abstentions?
I'm going to abstain.
So we have one abstention, we have one opposed, and 6 in favor. Am I correct?
Correct.
Dave, I thought there were only 8 board members on.
6
that-
and 2. 6 and 2, that's correct. Yeah.
6-2-1.
6. Oh, I thought,
If
I
you
didn't
said
hear,
there's
I heard
there was an
one.
abstention, if there was an abstention, you
Yeah,
said
that's-
6-2-1, but is there only 8 board members on?
No, I'm sorry. It was 6-1 and 1. I'm sorry.
Okay.
There are 8 board members. So we have 1 abstention, 1 no, and 6 approval, which would pass. So thank you. We'll move on to the next item, Mrs. Stratton.
Yes. Item B, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve the attached revised 2021 district calendar to account for the following as listed below.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
We have 1 no. Any abstentions?
And I'm going to abstain.
Okay. 1 abstention, 1 no, 6 yes, motion carries. Thanks, Mrs. Stratton. Before we adjourn, we always leave an opportunity for board members if they would like to be heard prior to the end of the voting meeting. Hearing none,
I have
hearing-
something to say.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jerry.
No problem. This was a very difficult decision. This is one of the things that, you lose sleep at night over this whole situation that's going on. And there's 3 reasons why I personally felt that it was necessary for us to do this virtual learning. Number 1 is there was just too many questions. There's a question mark after question mark after question mark. And we just don't have the answers. It was so vague on certain things because we're in a mystery type of area right now. So that was number 1. Number 2 is I just don't think that we were prepared. I just don't think that we have the right preparation to get everything done in the next 3 weeks to get this thing done. And everything from the buses down to the logistics of having the kids go in and have some kids stay in a certain area and then go into another area. We just weren't prepared. And the third reason is I think is just consistency. I mean, I read every single email that I got from the community. I read every single one, and they have this, one person has one view and one has another. But one thing they couldn't question and they couldn't really answer is what do they know about the future? And no one knew what's going to happen. And I think that was the one thing that kind of just made me think about that. And then even when we were going to go with the idea of doing 5 days a week, we still had issues. There was some emails we got saying that, kids, I don't want my kids to wear a mask, or I don't want my kids to be exposed to these things, or it was a fight either way you go. And my personal feelings is this is the safest way. This is the least risky. If we get responsible, if we become responsible for a teacher's death or a kid's death, it'll be the end of things, in my opinion. And I think that's one thing that we need to make sure before. We need to guarantee that our kids are going to be safe, our teachers are going to be safe, as well as our administrators. And that's why I'm going for virtual for right now. Maybe we can ramp up slowly once things clear up. But I personally feel that we just weren't ready to do this. And that's my statement.
Thanks, Mr. Miller. Yeah, I want to say, I think, all the board members have struggled with this for sure. I mean, we've all received the emails. We've all had opportunity to reflect. We've had conversations with our families. We've had conversations with friends, and we've heard, multiple sides of the issue. So this is something that truly is a challenge for us as a community. It's been hard. I know for our administration, it's not easy to kind of go this way. But I think, when I look at the amount of work that our administration has put into this recommendation, and I recognize how hard and how thoughtful Dr. Miner and his staff have been, how many people have been engaged and involved in making this decision, all of our professional folks using their best both experience and knowledge and understanding of the current situation. I think taking 9 weeks and having an opportunity to kind of get started in this manner, and then making a real strong effort to do everything we can to reopen after 9 weeks, assuming that things are in a good position, and we have maybe gleaned from other school districts, what's really worked, what's been successful, and how we can open up in a safe way, in a responsible way. So I personally want to thank the administration, staff, and those community members who've been involved, board members as well, for all the effort they put into this. And I know, you've also, sometimes make decisions that are not going to go down well with some of your friends and families. And, but I think, in the long run, we have to realize that not everyone is going to be pleased with this decision. So thanks again. Are there any other comments before we move on?
Dave, I just have a question. It's a 38-page plan. It's very well done. I'll say that there were about 500 people on the phone call earlier today to review the plan. Assuming that each one was a parent representing a family, that leaves about 3,500 people who may not have gotten the message. So I know that we pushed the plan out today, but what mechanisms are in place to what I'll call socialize that plan, be responsive to questions or emails to ensure that those folks that may not have attended today will have not only access to the plan, but access to somebody to walk them through or answer their questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chapina. As you mentioned, that plan was sent out prior to the board meeting through all of the district channels. So it is on the district website, it is on the district app. It was pushed out through the district Facebook, as well as the district Twitter page and my own personal superintendent's Twitter as well. It went out through parent link so that every parent and staff member received it through an email through parent link. The last page of the plan included an email for every administrator that would be a direct contact for any specific element of the plan for which a person would have a concern. Certainly welcome to contact me via email or through my office phone. That's available on our district website, as well as Dr. Winters, Mrs. Harris, Jill Way in the technology department. Again, that last page of the plan, which is available and printable there, has everyone's contact information for anyone has a direct question or concern. The entirety of the administrative team, including myself, is more than happy to have phone conversation, email discussion, whatever we need to do to help parents, community members, students be familiar with the plan and have their questions answered.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other board members would like to be heard at this time? Okay, if not, I'll accept a motion for adjournment this time.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion carries. We're adjourned, and we're going to move immediately into our workshop meeting. So I think our meeting was short enough that we can move right into it. But if anybody needs to take a little break, jump off and hop right back on as quickly as you can. But we're going to move forward. And we're going to move into that workshop agenda at this time. So as I'm looking at the workshop agenda, I do see public comments first. I'm going to move those a little bit later on into the to below item 3, which would take us prior to the minutes portion of our workshop meeting. Just a comment about workshops and what we do at our workshop meeting. Again, this is our opportunity for board members to thoroughly understand and vet the items that are on the agenda for the voting meeting on the 18th. So what you'll see are proposed items for the agenda that we'll be voting on at that time. And this also provides us with plenty of opportunity for discussion with our administrative team and those who may be able to answer the questions for us if there are any questions. So we're going to move first to our building program report, and I'm going to turn this over to Ann Guidish and to her presenter, Jamie Schlesinger.
Joe, would you please bring up Jamie's presentation?
And do you just want to give a quick rundown, or do you want me to jump in?
Sure. You know, over in July 14th, a business function, and then Jamie presented an update on the next refunding, the 2012A issue. We also discussed including new money for capital projects that are on the horizon. Again, we discussed it on July 21st. Jamie's back today to give an update, really look at the new money scenarios again, as well as review the timeline that we are looking at to get this done. Go ahead, Jamie.
Great, thanks. Well, thank you everybody again. Obviously, when I come, we're talking about some things that are, you know, obviously not very interesting, but obviously very helpful to the district. We've been taking advantage of the market over the last few years to hopefully refinance and save some money for the district. As Ann mentioned, there's some potential capital needs based on your capital plan, which the business function meeting has been, you know, really working hard to decide a recommendation for how much you may want to add. And depending on, you know, your thoughts, you know, we can adjust our timeline. But given where we are today, you know, we could proceed potentially at your next meeting for a parameters resolution. And that's really kind of the main concept of the conversation today. Again, please understand there's some flexibility here if necessary. You can turn to the next page, Joe. Again, not something you haven't seen before. Just go to the bottom. I always like to use that last graph on the bottom. Right, yeah, right there. You know, interest rates have remained very, very low for the last, you know, month or so. I think as you know, the world continues to kind of stick with what's been going on, there really hasn't been, you know, any major, you know, impacts to the capital markets. Certainly, there are things coming on the horizon that I think could impact us. You know, whether that's, you know, the impact of the election, or, you know, if there's, you know, other things that could happen that we're unaware of. Certainly, from our perspective, you know, the investors have been out there on the bond side. You know, we did quite well with the bank loan. Certainly, rates are quite low, and that's why we're looking at the savings we're talking about here. You can go to the next page, Joe. So this is what you've seen this before. This is a very, you know, simple, you know, process of how we've done, you know, your financings most recently, and it's really to give you as a board and us as a finance team the flexibility to jump in the market, you know, when necessary. We've come and done something called a parameters resolution in the past, where we essentially authorize the purpose of their financing, you know, obviously whether it's a refinancing of the 2012 A's and or borrowing some additional funds. That's a question for you. We'd establish some maximum amounts, maximum maturities, and maximum payments, and of course, maximum interest rates. In all those cases, they're going to be much higher than what we expect them to be, but for purposes of flexibility and adjustment to when we price any financing, it gives, you know, us some ability to make some adjustments. Understand that, you know, we're not going to do something unless we think it makes sense. despite the fact it may look kind of odd on the parameter side. Again, when that parameters would occur is certainly up to you. If we were to do this at the meeting next week, we'd really need to kind of know tonight or within the next few days about how much money you would want to borrow. So Peter Edelman from Stevens and Lee could do the proper advertising for the board meeting. I think we have a range of how much we're thinking about, but again, that's a conversation for another day. Obviously, if we do move forward with that, there'd just be a couple documents to sign, and we'd ultimately have a signature done at the time of pricing. Turn to the next page. Just taking a quick snapshot. I know with everyone's faces on the right-hand side, you may not be able to see this, but your current debt, we've done a good job of adjusting your principal and interest payments to help offset, any, potential bumps. We've done a lot of refinancing the last few years. The bottom right-hand corner, which is column 18, which I know it's tough to see, I'll just kind of read out. The district's paying, currently about $7.3 million because of the refinancings. It's going to bump up a little bit in 22 to about 7.6, 7.7 for the next couple of years, bump a little bit more to about 7.8, and then about 8 million-ish. That's a pretty good job of cleaning up your debt. It's relatively short, as we all know, which is a good thing. The total principal outstanding is about $59 million. We are looking at refinancing what is considered column 12, which is about $20 million of outstanding debt. Between the last two issues, we've kind of hit most of your debt and, reducing it hopefully to the 1% range. So not much more lower than we can go than that. This particular issue is callable in November of 2015, which essentially means we can settle as early as October. Clearly we're not, I'm sorry, as early as August. We're obviously at this point not going to be settling in August because we're just not ready yet. Whether you do it today, tomorrow, next month, you have the flexibility to do it at your time that works for you. But again, given this potential refinancing, there's going to be some pretty significant savings. And now if you want to do this and not pay additional cost of issuance for a second transaction, we were thinking about adding some additional projects for funds or projects. You can turn to the next page. This is really the nuts and bolts of, kind of option one. I know Ann can probably touch on, what projects we're kind of keeping within the $2.5 million range. The blue section is just a snapshot of what the last refinancing accomplished. We saved about $1.2 million by doing that bank loan. It offsets some of your debt service. That looks very similar to what you saw on the previous page. The red section is, I think, a conservative estimate of what I think the savings will be with this particular refinancing. Right now, that total, I know you're not seeing it on the bottom. Joe, if you want to slide down a little bit, you can see the total. The total right now, I think from conservatively, is about $950,000. I think we're probably going to get well over $1 million pending market rates. You can see the way we were taking the savings. We're trying to continue to offset, to make things a little bit more level to offset any potential new money needs. And that's essentially what we're doing with the green section. You've seen before, and what we'll do many times, we're going to utilize a wrap structure if you were to borrow some additional funds. So essentially means we're going to be putting much of the principal in the years where your debt kind of drops off. And you can see pretty naturally that you have a nice place to stick any money you borrow in your 2029 fiscal year debt service. Incrementally, because it's relatively short and because interest rates are so low, the incremental debt service to the district just on the new money, if you were to borrow $2.5 million, is about $47,000. But keep in mind, because of the refinancings that we've done, if you would have looked at the start of the year to where you would be today, you're actually, their overall debt is actually dropping. So not that I'm saying anything's free, that's not what I mean, but you can see that we're doing a good job here assisting with any potential capital needs, and helping your future debt burden. So again, your debt wouldn't be extended much farther than what you currently have, and you'd be able to generate some enough money to do at least a minimum amount of projects based on what was in the capital plan. Again, about $47,000 incrementally just on this debt. So let me stop if anyone has any questions on this page. If you just want to skip to the next page, it's not going to be much more different. The main difference here is obviously we'd be borrowing some additional money. I think there was a national discussion about a $3.6 million additional needs. This would obviously increase the amount of debt burden on the incremental debt service or interest that you'd be paying on that. So instead of that $47,000, it would bump up to $66,000. And of course, that last year you'd pay off the balance of the principal. Again, just comparing what you started your year with to where you would be after the refinancings. Again, it is lower, which is good news. But again, obviously your point here is how much money do you need? Do you need it today? And if you do, it certainly makes a lot of sense to tack it on since you're going to be paying some cost associated with this particular refinancing. But that said, the conversations that we have with the business function group was, you have to have reasonable expectations to spend the money within a 3-year period. That's really a tax issue. Based on everything we talked about, I think a number of these projects you can certainly fit within that time period. There are some future needs that may not be able to do today, but I think the amounts that we were talking about fall within that period of time. This doesn't necessarily mean that you don't need, if you don't want to do this now and do this in the future, it doesn't stop you from doing it. It's just really a conversation of, do you like where interest rates are today? Do you think you're going to spend the money within a period of time? And, are you fearful of where interest rates could go in the future? I don't know if we're going to see a dramatic increase in interest rates over the next few months, just given, where things could go. But certainly with uncertainty of, as I mentioned, the elections or other things, you just never know in this world. But certainly we're at, near historic lows, which is something I've said for a long time. But it's good to say it when we're talking about debt. So I'll stop.
Excuse me, Jamie, a quick question. And could you, for everybody's edification, including those that might be participating via YouTube, could you tell us how many capital projects are out 3 years and what is the total dollar figure for those capital projects?
So Calamita, there's a second attachment, if you could bring it up. And if you go to page 2. Okay, the top section of this chart, and a lot of this is based on the facility study that we had done back in 2017, in addition to our roof management plan. So the first line, replacing the unit ventilators at junior high. KCBA's plan actually had that spread over a number of years. We've discussed over the past year or so, getting that done within the next 3 years, 1.9 million. Senior high, some cooling tower work, and other chillers, 240,000. And we also, the senior high and junior high, need some sidewalk replacements in addition to paving at about 257,000. Lorraine, some boiler plant work. Our roof management plan, we are in really good shape. Rifton is the next that needs roof restoration that needs to be done. This is a preliminary estimate of 740,000. And a junior high on the facility study to replace the auditorium seating. So that's essentially the 3.6 million of projects which have been given an estimate and that are in the time frame, for replacement or improvement. And obviously we are dealing with the transportation center, which we don't have a cost for. We're at a point where redesigning, and on August 16th, facility business function committee meeting, will provide scenarios, but we really won't know until we get to the point of getting a special exception to construct at Owatton, whether this is going to go ahead. So we don't have a cost at this point. We don't have a definite timeline. So that is in the process to be determined, in addition to anything that we need to do with this building, the administration building. So our 3-year window, we have estimates for about 3.6 million, and that's what we're basing that new money on. Mr. Aarons had mentioned about 2.5 million. I think that's his perspective. I will have a conversation with him when he returns from his vacation on, where to go in terms of reconciling which number is better. So if we go back to page 1, I tried to simplify the information that Jamie had given, because I get the question, will it cost the taxpayer more money? What is really the impact, on the district in terms of debt service? So with the refunding of 2012, conservative savings of 950,000 approximately. But if you look at column F and H, and that really is the net of the savings and any new debt service related to the 2.5 or the 3.6. So essentially we are in a positive impact, meaning we're not adding to debt service essentially. Fitting in this new money with this refunding works out very nicely in terms of, having positive savings as well as keeping our debt, pretty level, our local effort. So any questions on that?
And so the projects that you listed over the next 3 years, they're needs, not wants, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, as we sit here and look at, I mean, you can only plan for what you know, but at 3 point, if I can recall, and Jamie, you probably weren't serving the board at the time from PFM, but I believe when I joined the board in 2013, we were carrying almost $88 million in debt. And did I hear you say we are now carrying 59 million?
That's the principal outstanding. That's correct.
Principal outstanding. Okay. So when I look at where we are and look at other projects, I'm just wondering, if we were to not have the capital to do some of the projects that we might have on a 4-year or a 5-year timeline now, and if we could step them up into a 3-year period, yes, we would take on more debt to complete those projects, but they're also projects where the debt service is minimal and would have less impact on the taxpayer than if we got hit with something that was an emergency and was a nut that was so big that maybe interest rates are too high, or we couldn't get a parameters resolution out there quick enough in order to be able to get some funding for it. So I guess what I'm saying is, are there projects that are sitting out there at year 4 and year 5, that might be something that we should consider now and then speed up the timeline in doing them?
If you're, I don't know, if you're asking me, could you do the senior high turf a year ahead of time? That's possible. And knowing full well that we need to do something with the transportation center. I can't answer, with certainty that that's going to happen or when it's going to happen. And maybe viewing it as a standalone might be a little better. Sure, you incur additional financing costs. But also, Jamie, when is the next opportunity? Don't we have something in 2022?
Yeah, the next potential refinancing, and that was, 2017 at this point. That is a September of 2022. So there's a possibility to refund there. I don't, off the top of my head, know what the underlying rates are, but the way the world's been going, I think everything we've refunded saves money. So you never know. But yeah, that would be the next time we'd probably consider something.
So moving up some of those that are in the bottom section of that sheet, like the turf, that's possible.
Yeah. I'm just saying is I think it might be something worthwhile to look at. I mean, look, you know, the reality is that nobody, you know, I mean, the world operates on debt, right? You know, I mean, most people wouldn't have a home if they didn't go into debt, right? Or take on debt. So, you know, I'm just saying if we're in a good rate environment right now, if we know that we have needs, but we have them in years 4 and 5, and there's not an opportunity for us to refi for almost another 2 years or 18 months, you know, is now the time to sort of consider that. And should the board step back and maybe just think more deeply about years 4 and 5 and whether or not they come up into years 1, 2, or 3. That's it.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad you brought that up, Mike, because, you know, when I look at the transportation center, and I've said this numerous times previously and served on the ad hoc, you know, committee to look at our transportation program and, you know, recognize that we're committed to transportation services and operating it on our own. And we take a look at the current center that we have right now. The facility is I'm not sure whether we can hold off another 3, 4, or 5 years before we move on to a project like that. So I'd like the board's opinion in terms of what we come up with in August, you know, when we do meet as a facilities committee and we get some idea of what that proposal, you know, could look like, what that might mean in terms of costs, what are the likelihoods of actually getting it approved, you know, through the variance with the township, and considering adding that to our capital projects, you know, for the more immediate future and not the distant future. We have kicked this can down the road for such a long time. And I don't know whether we can actually, with the condition of that building, whether we can actually say that it can actually sustain another 3, 4, or 5 years before it's replaced. It's just a reality. So I'd like to continue to try to keep that, you know, some level of flexibility and open-minded thinking, you know, in regard to, you know, the long-term needs of our school district with a transportation center that will serve us conceivably for the next, you know, 30 or 40 years. Jamie or Ann, is there any more to your presentation?
No, I mean, like I said, you know, it's really for you guys as a board to decide what you want to do. I know that, you know, again, your next meeting is on the 17th. The initial timeline, which I know is on the next page, if you want to just snapshot that real fast, you know, just kind of allows us to get in front of you, you know, on the 18th to approve something if you wanted. You know, Ann, Brian, whoever, you know, will be working on some information that we would start the process with S&P. That's really what drives the timing for us. I think we'd be doing this as a bond issue since we kind of used our one shot at a really good bank loan with the JP Morgan proposal. So I think the bond market's the way we're going to end up going here. You know, if we move toward this timeline, you know, we try to get a rating completed by, you know, the end of this month. And potentially, you know, price as early as September and lock in rates to allow us to get either the funds you need or to the refinancing by early October. Again, you know, if there's some additional time you need, you know, we just kind of push it back by a few weeks or a month. That's certainly a preference for you.
Yeah. So you need a figure. You need a sort of a dollar figure.
Yeah, because technically, if we do a parameters, we're going to hit a maximum amount for projects. And certainly we have to make a decision. We know that funding makes perfect sense. We know you're going to do that, or at least I believe you're going to do that. If you're going to borrow additional money, then we would add that to the totals. And based on that amount, we would structure the debt off that. And we put that flexibilities that I talked about. You know, if you're going to go, you know, much more than, you know, the amounts we're talking about here, maybe there's some flexibility in what we're going to put in there because it's usually a high enough number. But if Mr. Jupina's, you know, concept of adding even more, we'd really need to know that because we wouldn't be able to fit that into the numbers. So that's one thing I should point out. But again, the way it would work is, August 18th, your meeting. Peter Edelman would probably get the advertisement in the Reading Eagle, probably, end of the previous week, which is essentially 3 days or so in advance when it would appear, and he'd have everything else prepared. So you have a little bit of time, but it'd be helpful to know something.
Doesn't give us a whole lot of time to do some of the thinking that I think we need to do. That's kind of really puts us on a tight schedule.
Yeah. And again, the option of the bonds doesn't mean it disappears. It's just when it can occur. So this is not a pressure situation. It's just that this is the timeline that at least we've set up at this point.
Yeah.
That's all I've got.
Any other comments for Ann?
No, I have no
Jamie?
comments. I will. Oh, which wrong Ann?
Okay, are we good to move on the agenda?
Well, thank you, everybody. If I see you on the 18th, if not, I'll see you another meeting, I'm sure. Have a great night, everyone.
I'll be in touch, Jamie. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks, Ann. Okay, we're going to move to public comments now. And Joe Way, I'm wondering if you have any comments that were submitted specifically related to this this agenda.
Dr. Hemberger, I do have several. Let me bring up the first one. I have a comment from Jeremy Schaefer at 417 Steeplechase Drive. No question here, just thanks for staying strong through all of this and thinking of the health and safety of our kids first. Truly an asset to the community. I'm sorry, it was Christy Schaefer.
Thank you.
And the next question comes from Sarah McHenry of 17 Bent Creek Circle. Dear Board, thank you for your considering Dr. Miner's recommendation to move forward with an all virtual option. It's not an easy decision, but it is the decision that best protects our students, teachers, and faculty and community. I think the work that has gone into creating a more robust virtual option has been outstanding. I applaud our dedicated teachers and administrators for making this difficult decision and putting our community safety first. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.
I have a question from Nikki Warm of 56 Sycamore Drive. It's a lengthy one. First, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Miner and her educational team that put forth a well-planned out virtual plan. I'm very impressed with the plan as an educator and mother of 3 boys. I personally cannot comprehend how a restaurant can only be at 25% capacity, but we have to send the kids back at 100% capacity. I do not understand why we cannot sit in the movie theater for 2 hours, but children can be jammed into a school building for 7 hours. Let's face it, the MLB has an unlimited amount of resources, and one team alone has over 18 cases of COVID. As a school district, we have teachers using their own money and applying for grants in order to provide supplies and resources for their classes. How do we expect a school district to have enough funds to keep everyone safe while a professional baseball team cannot? Let's be real and honest. Children will not get the same education whether they are in the classroom. Children will not get the same education whether they're in the classroom or at home. When in the classroom, we're taking away all of the best practices. Children will not get the opportunity to socialize with their peers. Our kids will be in lockdown worse than a prison. So why do this to the children? Why risk a child's life, a teacher's life, an administrator's life, a paraprofessional's life, a secretary's life, a custodian's life, a bus driver's life? Please look at the whole picture. Sending these children back to school right now is not the answer. We need to keep everyone safe. I have full confidence in the school district that the teachers will rise again and make it work for the children while learning virtual. Please vote yes to the start of the school year off virtually. be the leaders, and set a new tone for Berks County. I truly admire the leadership that Dr. Miner has demonstrated in the past week. I've spoken to her on the telephone, and she's an amazing, caring person who always wants what's best for the school district, for everyone involved. Thank you again, Dr. Miner and her educational team. The plan is well thought out and very impressive.
Thank you.
The next question comes from Amy Brandt of 3424 Stoner Avenue. Board members, thank you very much for your time and attention. Without the ability to measure students' understanding of lessons via body and/or facial language, a teacher normally would see in the classroom, and if students may find it difficult to ask questions of teachers they are newly only virtually acquainted with, how will teachers recognize when certain students may struggle with pieces of synchronous or asynchronous instruction? Leaving the requests for extra help out of the students and up to the students themselves may result in some students deciding they will just move on without a full understanding or what they were taught or just trying to learn themselves. Will the office hours go both ways? Meaning, will teachers reach out for time with certain students who they feel may not be fully up to speed?
I'll take a moment to answer that question. I actually think it's a very good question, and it's one that applies to teaching and learning in a brick and mortar setting as well as a virtual setting. Often a teacher will say, "Are there any questions?" and no one will raise their hand and ask a question. Maybe they may be embarrassed or for some other reason. So we always want to encourage teachers instead to say, "I need everyone to ask me." Those types of teaching and learning practices are best practices virtually or in brick and mortar, and we'll continue to employ them in the virtual setting. And as far as office hours, absolutely, teachers can reach out to students as well.
Mr. Way?
That is it for the questions.
Oh, okay. Thanks very much. All right. We are going to move back to our agenda to item 4. And we'll be at our next board meeting, we'll be considering the minutes from the board voting meeting of July 21st. I'm going to move to our next section then of the agenda, board policy. And pleased to say that Dawn Harris and I have been working together. I typically take a little bit more of a role in laying out the policy changes that we can expect and helping to the board to understand what those changes are. And so Dawn and I have kind of been working together, have decided that is part and parcel of her role now. So Dawn, I want to thank you for your part in this and for preparing the summary for the board. While we've already gone through the first reading, or I'm sorry, the second reading policies that are on the agenda that are listed here at our last workshop and voting meeting. But if you could kind of acquaint us with the policies that are due for first reading for the board meeting on the 18th.
Thank you, Dr. Hamburger, for relinquishing the role of policy guru to me. I appreciate it very much. As I mentioned before, I enjoy working on policy. I think it's a very important part of what we do. Reminder for everyone on the call, you already did a very comprehensive review of most of your policies in your policy book. The policies that we're working on now were policies that were updated within the last 2 or 3 years that we're now getting to now that you've finished that whole comprehensive review. So we have 5 on the agenda for tonight, and I'm going to just give you a highlight of the updates on each of those policies. So I'm clustering together policy 222, 323, and 707, as they all relate to changes to the code based on Act 93 and Act 111. These are your tobacco and vaping products policies. 222 relates to students, 323 relates to employees, and 707 relates to use of facilities. Probably the biggest update to these 3 policies is the more new and more comprehensive definition of tobacco products. that are included in the policies. That now includes the electronic devices. And it actually excludes a device sold by a licensed dispensary. I do want to point out that the policy does contain the language that clarifies that federal law requires that school entities maintain a drug-free environment and at which marijuana of any kind is prohibited. Policy 222 also addresses the prohibition of student-possessed medical marijuana by students on school property. The policies also address the need for the district to notify students, staff, and parents and guardians about the tobacco and vaping products policies. Policy 311 is also on the docket. That policy is a reduction of staff policy. Again, this was one that was in the queue based on updated provisions in Act 55 of 2017. Remember, I said we're going back a few years in terms of some of the updates we need to do. This includes updated language related to elimination of positions as well as suspensions and furloughs. It also includes new language regarding economic furloughs with a provision that a district is able to do economic furloughs only if it furloughs at least an equal percentage proportion of its administrative staff. There are some caveats to that included in the policy based on the code that the State Board of Education has the right to waive that requirement if the district's operations are already fully streamlined or elimination or suspension would harm stability to student programs. That policy also includes some guidelines for the board making a decision about economic furloughs, and it also reinstates the seniority provision related to suspension and furlough. Performance evaluation ratings continue to be the first consideration in terms of that process, and then that's followed by seniority. Finally, in that policy, there's language clarifying what that means to be based on performance evaluation ratings, and that it will be based on the two most recent consecutive performance evaluations for an employee. And finally, we have policy 333, which is professional development. And that was updated based on the provisions in Act 18 of 2019. Act 18 was sort of a follow-up to Act 44, which was the really big sort of comprehensive school safety act. Act 18 clarified a lot of requirements around trauma-informed practices, and related to this policy, it is including a minimum of 1 hour of training related to trauma-informed practices in the school's professional education plan. But I will say Exeter is already doing a lot more than 1 hour of training related to trauma-informed practices. So you're well beyond that requirement. Most of the language in these policies is required language coming from code. Some of your policies will have a lot of district customization based on what the policy is and what the changes have been. But for the most part, these are pretty standard and have just required language in them.
And Don, do those policies reflect what's written into the CBAs of the different bargaining units?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Dave, is that something that we need to confirm?
Yeah, I'm trying to think which specific policies. I mean, reduction of staff certainly is one that, you know, we need to look at carefully. I know we have Ellis on the line too. If he has any thoughts about, you know, the CBAs that we have.
Dr. Hamburger, Ellis has left the meeting. So
oh, okay.
I do think that is well advised to reconcile the CBAs with the policy.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, we certainly have to develop a CBA that's consistent with policy. So I would suggest that when we look at this language, look at any language in the policy, actually anything that we really need to kind of make sure that, you know, we don't put anything in the CBA that is not consistent. So thanks for bringing that to our attention, Mike.
I just had one other question. This is sort of related but unrelated to policy. A lot of the policies refer to administrative regulations, and you know, I'm not I not too long ago was reviewing a policy around out of district tuition, which was fairly vague, and I believe that in that policy it required. Or not required, but referred to an AR. So I don't know, is there I would assume there's an administrative regulation manual, and is that reviewable by the board?
Mr. Davina, this is Dr. Miner. So I, have not had the opportunity to, in my short time at the district with all the pandemic planning review, where our AORs are housed. Perhaps Dr. Winters could comment on that, but you're correct. Typically, there is an AR binder that the superintendent generates with, his or her team to implement the policies, and that would be something that, the board would be able to review. Dr. Winters, I don't know if you can say anything about the previous state of our ARs, as I'm not familiar.
Sure. So all of our administrative regulations are online in a drive called Enterprise, which is a district drive. And within Enterprise, there's 3 separate folders. There's the PSBA, recommended AR, and then there's 2 district folders, ARs that we've reviewed and finalized based on PSBA recommendations, and ARs that are still in progress and being looked at. It's something that, we did work on intermittently over the last several years, asking different administrators based on the series of ARs to review certain ones. So, my department looked at all the ARs related to, textbooks, curriculum, professional development, et cetera, HR, the ones related to personnel, and so forth. We don't have them all printed out and in binders. They're all digital, but it wouldn't be difficult to do that if that was something that we wanted to have.
Yeah, and I don't want to waste time on it. I have a particular one that I was interested in following up on, and I can follow up on that at some other point. And by the way, I'm not being mysterious, but we have no power here, so you're gonna hear me but not see me shortly.
Oh gosh.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I will say, and just a few more comments about ARs before we move on, but we have expanded our PSBA policy service to include ARs as part of what we get. So sample administrative regulations are available through PSBA. They're very labor intensive and time consuming if you have to develop these on your own, and they're written to be consistent with the PSBA sample language as well. Sometimes ARs are suitable to be included with the policy, and that addendum to the policy is useful for anyone in the public who might be actually trying to, get more detail and more information. Sometimes forms and things like that are used as an addendum to policy as well. In cases where it's strictly used for administration as a way to kind of put the meat on the bones for policy, or to kind of further guide the administration in terms of implementation of policy, then it's not necessarily required. But the board has no role in adopting ARs or approving them or even shaping them in any way. As long as they're consistent with policy, they're simply tools used by the administrative team to help them implement policy. And I think I think when Dr. Phillips was here, fell a little bit behind on the AR process. So I know that's one of the initiatives that Dawn and the team are going to be kind of working on in the years to come.
That's why I unmuted. I just wanted to contribute to that conversation that moving forward, we are going to be using that extra added feature of using those sample ARs heavily to be able to guide our AR drafting for the district. And there are several that we need to get caught up on.
Any more questions about policies? Dawn, thanks for stepping in on that. You did an excellent job, and we're going to move on in the agenda to business functions. Now, I'm not sure if Mr. Aarons is on the call or not, but I would invite him to speak up if he is. And
I am. So for the business functions committee, there's going to be 2 recommendations for next week, pending anything else that'll come up. The first one is our annual special education grants, and also the renewal of our tax collector audit service. Patrick, I'm not sure if you want to make any comments about the grant. I don't know if it's necessary or not at this point, but I'll just invite you to go ahead and do that at this time.
Thanks, Mr. Aarons. This is not a grant that I'm that familiar with, since it's specific to special education, and so it's not one that I have worked with in the past. I know that Mrs. Harris is new here. I'm not sure if Dawn, if you can speak at all in terms of what that grant is to help define it. It's not one that I have familiarity with, or even Dr. Minor in your previous experiences.
well, I think this is IDEA flow-through dollars that
This is flow-through
federal
funding.
money.
This is Part B funding. Yeah,
Yeah.
this isn't it's labeled a grant, but it's not a grant as you would think of as something that you are filling out an application for and applying for. This is a standard Part B funding that we receive.
And it usually flows through the intermediate unit. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep, yeah. and then it's parsed out.
Yeah. And the district has some discretion in terms of how it uses those funds, but they are required to be used for special education purposes.
Correct.
Mr. Aarons, is there any, and you had also mentioned the renewal of the tax collector audit services. Is there anything you want to say about that?
I don't think there's anything to be said about that, unless that there's any issue with the auditors, but I suspect that if that would have been the case, it wouldn't have been on the agenda this evening.
There's no issue. It's just a renewal, a 1-year renewal.
All right. And then other than that, I would just like to quickly comment, I wasn't able to join the meeting earlier because of a work commitment, and the condition that I come to you in is one without power, and one that daylight is fleeting quickly from Mike. So you're going to see me be a little bit cryptic in a little bit, but I do want to, just for the record, state that I support the administration's proposal and what I believe was agreed to by the rest of the board earlier in the evening in terms of having a virtual program for the first 9 weeks of school. So I just want that included in the minutes.
Thanks, Hunter. And enjoy the rest of your vacation. If you can.
I'm going to try.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 7, Personnel Committee, and that's Mrs. Wilson.
Yes, next, in 2 weeks, we'll be voting on retirements of 2 support staff members and the resignation of a support staff member. We will also be voting on appointments of extracurricular staff and certificated substitutes and guest teachers. We will be approving a leave of absence and also course requests and staff conferences.
Dave, can I ask a question unrelated to any of the items? This is to Dr. Minor and Dr. Winters. Could you guys just sketch out for us what the status is of available substitutes in the coming months?
Certainly, Mr. Pina, I'd be happy to talk about that. First of all, as you may be aware, substitutes are in short supply everywhere. And in fact, one of the crises that's facing the state of Pennsylvania is a low number of teachers graduating out of our colleges, as well as potential administrators. So over the last several years, the teaching market hasn't been a great one. And so, unfortunately, we don't have deep pools in any of those. And so that necessarily affects our sub rates. In terms of subs with COVID-19. That's an extra layer of complication, as well as how we'll utilize substitutes in a virtual environment is something that is one of our, in the details discussions right now. So it continues to be very difficult to get substitutes. I anticipate that it will continue to be for quite a while. Interestingly, when I came to Exeter, I was surprised to find that Exeter does not use a substitute service as most districts do. And I think that actually may benefit Exeter because we have a pool of substitutes who are in the community who have direct relations with the school. And I think that's probably puts us in a better stead than most districts that have sub-services.
And just to add to that, Dr. Miner, one of the other things that we've talked about is mobilizing our team of guest teachers. The Human Resources Department keeps a comprehensive list of all of our guest teachers, which I believe is well over 60. And I see we have 2 additional ones on the agenda as well. And one of the things we've talked about moving forward is, doing some, kind of publicity or marketing around getting the word out to the community about if you're interested in serving as a guest teacher, we would love to, get you information in terms of how to go through the process and that type of thing. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
And any other comments or questions about the items on the Personnel Committee agenda? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Thanks, Allison.
Sure.
Facilities Committee, Mr. Fiddler.
Well, again, because of the power outage, I did not get to spend my Tuesday reviewing all this material. Do you have any information on these 2 items?
I can jump in if you'd like there, Mr. Fiddler.
Oh, Rob, great. Okay, thanks. I didn't know you were on the call.
Yeah, the change order ratification for Pagoda Electrical with the wiring of the equipment over there. What was not specified on the as-built drawings was, and what they encountered once they started doing the work is that some of these circuits shared a neutral, which I guess at the time the building was built was up to code and allowable. But as of this moment in time with this project, that is not code compliant. So so in order to rectify that, they need to split those neutrals, and so each circuit doesn't share a neutral. So so that's the first item there.
Great, thank you.
I'm unable to open that. Is there a dollar figure associated with that?
$36,000.
36, yes.
Thank you.
And the second one, Rob, do you have anything on that?
Yes, I believe Mrs. Guidish sent an email out to you guys, and I'll give you guys a quick rundown. At the project meeting last Thursday, the contractor informed us that the univents, the last piece of the puzzle to complete that project, which they were supposed to receive on August 7th, now had a ship date of August 28th. And obviously that is 4 days after school starts. So that was a major issue that I met with the contractor, with the Jim from KCBA and Dennis from SDE, who are on this call right now and can answer some technical questions if they come up. So basically what we did was we put together a plan factoring in that we would have students and teachers in these buildings on the 24th, and how the contractor was going to rectify that situation. Once we get to the point where we're waiting on the univents, the rest of the work will be completed, I believe, within the next 2 weeks, which will allow us to energize the system and provide cooling to parts of the building, except for the 64 classrooms where the univents are to be installed. So what part of this plan is to secure those areas in case there's kids in these classrooms, and to provide temporary cooling to these spaces. So they were notified of that plan this afternoon via email from the architect.
Got it. Thanks, Rob.
Can I ask a quick question on that quickly?
Yes.
Are there associated damages or in this contract, or are these conditions that are permitted by our contract or bid with them?
I do believe there are damages involved in this if we incur any costs associated with this project not completing and us needing to get children and teachers back in these schools.
Okay.
I guess my question.
And the only reason I bring this up, and I'm not really sure if this is. I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
No, we're trying to hear you a little bit, Hunter. It's kind of, you're breaking up just a little bit. So you want to give it another try?
Dave, do you want me to go?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better?
A little
Is
bit
that better? So
that's
my follow-up question to that would be.
Hunter, we're losing you. We're losing you.
Hunter, if you want to,
If he wants to like submit it,
like email the question to me or something, I could ask it for him.
right? Well, as Hunter's trying to process that thought.
I'll take it. I'll take it for the record. I'll follow up.
Okay, thank you. I guess my only question was, I mean, considering that we made a decision this evening to move to all virtual learning, for the first, quarter of the school year, what's the significance of this in terms of project completion, recognizing that, students most likely will not be in the building?
Well, from what my understanding is that the teachers will still be able to access their classrooms, so that those classrooms need to be in shape for those teachers. So, that the fact that we're going virtual really didn't change the plan that we put in place with the contractor. The only real difference on a facility standpoint of us being virtual for the first 9 weeks versus if the kids had come back on the 24th would be when the univents arrive, when they would be getting installed. Obviously, if we were back full time, that work would have to take place after hours and not interrupt the instructional day. That the fact that we might only have teachers or some teachers in the buildings, we could probably work around getting those univents installed during the day.
Okay. Any additional questions on these facilities items? Thanks, Rob.
Yep.
And thanks, Mr. Fiddler. Before we adjourn, another opportunity. Are there any board members who would request to be heard at this time? Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for their participation this evening, despite the storms, the floods, the tropical storm, the power outage. We made it through this evening before 9 o'clock. So want to wish everybody well and be safe, and we'll be getting together, I'm sure, in a very near future. Thank you. Have a nice evening.